Let's go round the room and, oh, thank you, Karen. Let's go around the room and just find a word, doesn't have to be a word from the grid, but find a word that you think represents your mindset. No, generally. Generally.
Strongly guarded.
Strongly guarded. Great. Good start.
Optimistic yet lazy.
Optimistic yet lazy. Oh, gosh, you guys are...
So there's the potential to overcome the laziness one day.
Yes, yes, you've given yourself an out clause there.
Inquiring.
Inquiring. Lovely. Reflective. Mm-hmm.
You're not talking about now, you're talking about just...
In general, how we see our mindset in general. Dutiful. Oh, poor you. I'll lend you some of mine. It's very irreverent and irregular.
Adventurous.
Oh, lovely. Open, yes. Sensitive. Democratic. Ooh, I've never had that before. That's fantastic. I love that. Empathetic. Helpful and hopeful. You said helpful, I hope. Yeah.
Curiously idealistic.
Curiously idealistic or curious and idealistic.
Both.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, curious is such a great quality. And I recently got a little kitten, and just noticing how she explores the world from being, completely freaked out, barely looking out, and then just getting a bit bolder, and how she is just driven by curiosity. And of course, we have that phrase, curiosity killed the cat. But I noticed that there will be some truth in it, that it's curiosity, that she's constantly, and my horse is not, we wouldn't call them curious because they're quite wary and they're quite guarded, because they are such fight or flight animals, mostly flight. But the cat is she's got this curiosity and without much fear, and it's so amazing to see it in action. It's just so pervasive. I don't know if it's her mindset, but it's certainly guiding her. What would you say for your mindset?
Other people have said them, open, inquiry, curious.
Yeah. Karen?
Spacious.
Spacious. Nice. David?
Inwardly observant.
Inwardly observant.
To serve.
Discernment.
No, just to serve.
To serve. To serve. A mindset of service. Mm. Just trying to see what mine would be. I think I think it would be curious. But there's also an element in, well, I don't know if that's mindset, but an element which is constantly looking for links between patterns and systems. I don't know if that's mindset as such, but always trying to find how things fit together. Yeah, it could be inquiring and associative. Ooh, look at that. Love that. I'm always impressed when people who can speak better English than me were in their second language. I had a business partner like that. She would converse with me in her third language, but she was so eloquent. Right, I'm getting distracted. Mindset. Mindset is a really big topic. Mindset and feeling, and I'm hoping to cover this by lunch. I want to just, start out by giving what we consider our definitions to be. And the mind is more like a vessel. If you think of the mind as a vessel, and in terms of, building up this picture that we've been creating of the whole system, the whole design and how it works. I mean, it is represented on the grid there. It may not be immediately obvious, but the whole kind of universal system is represented there in terms of how it applies to human beings. But if we think about how we've got this stream coming in like this, and we've got, what we spoke about of that energy constantly renewing itself, and we've got that sense of purpose. Oh God. You can tell why I went into teaching and not art, can't you? And this isn't quite accurate, but it'll do. Mission, connection. By the time we get to mindset, we're about here, not only in how energy flows down and moves, cascades from one frequency to another, but also in terms of where it rests, where it sits in our being. So if we start with mindset and we try to influence our life from mindset onwards, I don't know what I did to you in the last life. I'm really sorry. Just please forgive me. It's finished. It's over. And then we have feeling, and then we have form. So, and actually this connection element has an additional element in there, which relates to inspiration. And the connection element relates also to motivation. So if we start with mindset, we are trying to create influence where the system is almost at its end. It isn't starting, it's almost at its end. And so it's a very late stage to try and create influence. As we said before, the flow is strongest here and will carry on all the way through. It will affect all of these levels. So if we place whatever intention we want up here, that intention will automatically flow through. Even just that little meditation we did just now on opening the heart and just noticing that the heart can have such a profound influence on us just within moments. It doesn't need to be a long process over many days and weeks. It's just an instantaneous thing. You might have noticed how just affecting that level there automatically affects mindset. Yes, did anyone notice that? That when your heart is open, your mind just feels light and free and spacious. It isn't wanting to have a problem. So mind is like a vessel. It's like a container. And mind has different aspects to it. So mind, that container actually sits like this. So that there are aspects of our mind which we would call big mind, universal mind, which touch into these levels. And some people call it divine mind. If you think about the forms in nature, forms in nature are created by divine mind or big mind. They're not created by us, they're created by a kind of creative faculty which can dream up acorns, oak trees, you know, how babies grow in wombs. I mean, it's mind-boggling for us because we are most often operating with our mind down here, yeah? Where it has very little capacity to draw on this. So I call that the everyday mindset. So we want to make sure that, and what determines which aspect of mind we are logging onto is our, this is like the pantomime where I turn around and you finish the sentence. What determines which aspect of mind we log onto? Yeah, I was just about to say, come on, Ariane, you know this. So, where we place our consciousness is going to access a different capacity of mind, yes? So if our consciousness is trawling down here at the lowest level of our mental faculties, we are in a frequency. These are all frequencies, yeah? And the faster the frequency, the more the energy rapidly oscillates. And that gives you different possibilities. And of course up here, it's formless. These top three bands are formless. And form, as in, well, the top actually 4 bands are formless, but you get a lot of energetic forms happening here in this band. So mindset is most often, as we think of it, our mind, our thoughts, an everyday mindset. And it's distinct from divine mind, big mind, universal mind, okay? And our consciousness determines which frequency of the mind we're using. Now, our mind being a vessel, being a divine faculty, because remember, we fill it with individual thoughts, okay? So the thoughts occur within the capacity of the mind. Of course, you know, I'm drawing something to give you a visual handle, but of course this is not representative by any means. So thoughts arise within the mind. The vessel of the mind, the faculty of the mind, it could be more accurate, gives rise to thoughts. But we think of it as a vessel because we retain certain thoughts, okay? So the high frequency thoughts would be happening up here. Give me an example of a high frequency thought. Hmm? Love, yes. Prayer, yes. Joy. Serenity, yes, that's lovely. That's a good point actually, because when the vessel of your mind is full of thoughts, it's full. You know, if you have any bowl, you put things in it, it's full. So serenity would look something more like that, would look more like peace. So the vessel of the mind is there, the faculty of the mind is there, but it's not full of thoughts. So there's peace, stillness, serenity is a still mind. A clear mind. You know, we often want to clear our mind. If you want to clear your mind, you have to focus on the mind but not invite thoughts. You cannot get rid of the faculty of the mind. It's part of you. It's just like you can't decide, oh, I don't really want this right arm anymore. It's going to come where you come, yeah? It's going to stay with you. So the faculty of the mind is just a given. We can't choose whether we have a mind. We do have a mind. What we can choose is where we place our attention in the mind, and that will predispose us towards different kinds of thoughts. So the kind of thoughts, now this also links in with when we've been talking about the I, the sense of I am this, I am that. You might have noticed when we logged on to these aspects of our being, these frequencies within our being, these are also dimensions. I mean, it's all the same system. You will notice that the sense of having to protect or promote or foster a very individualized, separate, walled off sense of self is pretty much absent here. But by the time we get to mid-connection band, so from motivation all the way down, that's where we tend to foster our individual sense of I. And that's where our 5 senses are in service to. And that's where we find what we call ourselves. So our name applies usually from here down. By the time we get to inspiration, mission, vision, and purpose, we don't want a name. We don't feel any need to call ourselves. Like when you were in that sense of universal energy, you're not thinking of your name. You don't relate to yourself as your name. So your name much more pertains to the everyday human aspect. And that's where your identity sits. So depending on where you focus within your mind, you are going to get a very different version of you coming back to you. Yes? So I just asked you to name your dominant mindset. And any one of those answers we could have placed on here, depending on where they reside. Yeah? And nobody said, give me an example of a mindset that might be anxious. Yeah, trawling down here, right down on the bottom, constantly anxious, because your attention is in a frequency that isn't elevated enough and doesn't have the natural levity in it, doesn't have natural expansion in it, yeah? Because the expansion, light and harmony is getting step down, step down, step down as it comes through here, and only consciousness can access it, yeah? Only consciousness can access it. So our identity is also residing across this spectrum. And what tends to happen is when we have a strong identity, our thoughts then cluster down here at the bottom of course, it's not how it happens, but then it cluster down here. It looks like 2 boobs now, doesn't it? There's a bit of breastfeeding been going on there. Clustered down here at the bottom of the mind. Oh, that's going to be now enshrined, isn't it, in the live stream? Okay, so how do we choose our individual thoughts then? Because we often heard the phrase in New Age circles, you know, choose your thoughts, choose your reality. And anyone who's ever tried to grapple with a thought knows how difficult that can be. And one of the reasons is because we don't change the frequency. We're trying to change the thought, but not change the frequency. And it's just like you're trying to change your car tire while you're still driving. You have to change the frequency first. You have to place your consciousness in a frequency where there is a naturally gifted provision of expansion, light and harmony, and that will automatically seek out those thoughts which match it and reflect it. Yeah? That is how you change your thoughts, not by trawling along here and taking an anxious thought and saying to the anxious thought, I wish you were a confident thought. Yeah? We can't just replace it. Thoughts are categorized according to their frequency. It's the most important thing you need to know about thought. We have a choice as to which thoughts we think, but if we are holding our consciousness in a slower, I won't say lower, but slower frequency, then we have less choice about the thoughts that we are going to attract. Yeah? You can't have one without the other. So we need to attend to the frequency first. When we've attended the frequency, then we can have a choice about the thoughts that we think. Now, what happens when you're sitting quietly in meditation, minding your own business, and then a thought seems to come at you from nowhere and take hold of you, and it's already gone through and you're running with it by the time you realize it's even entered your being? There are thoughts which exist, okay? Now, if I were to write down, I didn't put you on the spot and ask for your dominant thoughts. I asked for your dominant mindset. But if we were to record, you don't mind if we use the walls to write everything down, do you? If you each take a section of the wall and you wrote down the 10 most common thoughts, I bet you if we went round and reviewed them, you would find 10 themes. Yes? You wouldn't find 150 themes, you'd find about 10 themes. So there are dominant thoughts which are in the collective consciousness. And one could say that they are collective thoughts, and only when they enter your being and you entertain them do they become your thoughts. Okay? Now, you don't have to engage with collective thought forms. You have a choice about that. But when you do engage with collective thought forms, maybe you're grappling with the idea of what makes life work, or, you know, how can we do this differently? There's a common thought, you know, people who want to serve and contribute. Your interaction with that thought, your processing of it, the level of consciousness you bring to it, the experience it has within you, is all being uploaded back into the collective consciousness. So even though you as an individual may grapple with a thought because you think it is individually worthwhile for you to understand that thought and overcome it, maybe it is to do with anxiety, maybe it's to do with jealousy or whatever it is, maybe it's to do with anger, then the good work that you bring to that thought actually does get uploaded into the collective consciousness, so other people can benefit from the contribution you've made towards that thought. So yes, there are collective thoughts, yes, we work on them individually, and yes, we give back our contribution. Now, what happens when a thought takes hold of you? What happens in your energy field when a thought takes hold of you? Or you take hold of a thought, actually, more accurately. Yeah, you temporarily become that thought because of the imprint in your energy field. So this is also, you know, the picture. It's not only the macrocosm of the universe, this whole system here, it's also the microcosm of us as a human being. So this whole thing, and because each of these levels also has a corresponding energy body which radiates out, your whole being is, you know, off this page, yeah? So whenever you take on a thought, that thought is going to imprint itself into the energetic mechanism of your being. So you will experience that sensation. What happens when you take on, what happens to your being when you take on an expansive thought? What kind of imprinting goes on then? Individual and collective, but what is the sort of gesture? What? Expansive. So elevated thoughts create expanded sensations. What happens if you've got a thought like, I hate that person, or I'm going to... Contractions, and the absolute opposite happens. So when we work with the sort of natural design, and we use the encoded facilitation within it, we can allow our thoughts to be elevated, and that will produce sensation which is in accordance, or we could say truthful to, the origin from which it came. When we have a contracted thought, it's operating in the opposite, yeah? So instead of elevated thoughts, we have very low thoughts. Instead of expanded sensation, we have contracted sensation. What are some of the words that we give to contracted sensation?
Anger.
yeah. Anger is considered an emotion, and the contracted sensation it creates is pain.
I'm inflexible.
Comfort, rigid, I would say, yeah. Limitation. Fear is an emotion which creates these. We're talking about sensation now. Pain, discomfort, rigidity, limitation, restriction, on and on and on. Yeah? So these are the names that we use. I won't put hurt there because hurt is a concept about pain. So these are the effect that a contracted thought will have on our energy field. So those contracted thoughts can only happen down at this end of the spectrum because our ego identity can only operate in this realm. Our ego identity can only operate in this realm. So anytime we have a contracted thought, we know it is pertaining to some element of our living life, our humanness. We know that it is by definition not taking into account our universality and our universal connection and all of the properties and qualities and structure that you find here. We are not logging onto that in that moment. And we cut ourselves off from that possibility and we leave ourselves only in a mental realm with mental forms, yeah, and mental thoughts. Can you see that? So a purely mental realm governed by an ego identity is by definition missing these components, yeah? So that's why it creates these kind of sensations in our field, yeah? So you can start to see that we always need to have the presence of this registered. We don't need to reside there permanently, but we need to be able to at least acknowledge and allow that access at all times. Otherwise, we cut ourselves off from expansion, light, and harmony, and then everything from that point onwards is then trying to operate without those elements. And that's how we end up with contracted thought. So, what then is mindset? So mindset is the dominant thoughts that we think. So we know what mind is, it's a divine vessel. We know what thoughts are, they're individualized electrical impulses or encapsulated electrical impulses. And then mindset. So dominant thought patterns create mindsets. So if we think a thought once, it will have a passing effect on our energy field, and then we will move on to something else. What's the longest you think you can maintain a single thought uninterrupted?
Always a chain, keep connecting to the next. Maybe it's one subject, but keep moving into a progressive or regressive way.
Yeah, it's a bit like this, isn't it? That we've got somehow, there's the thought with a few component parts, and we let go of that bit, and we add another one on there, and we let go of that bit, and we add another one on there. So it feels like a flow. It feels like a continuation because thoughts cluster in groups. So associated thoughts cluster in groups, and that's how we hop from one to the other. And sometimes we make great big leaps across oceans into something completely unrelated. But that aside, that original thought, how long can we maintain that? What's the few seconds, yeah. Anyone who's been a long-term meditator knows how hard it is to hold one's focus in an uninterrupted way without any distractions, or, you know, it feels like there's the battle is on. As soon as you want to be quiet, it's like the assault. Yeah.
Meditation, in everyday use.
In everyday use. Mm-hmm. How do you think that changes it when we're in meditation? How do you think that changes it?
Because you're focused.
Yeah, you are intentionally focused.
Will to
Yeah.
that particular thought, so you can bring yourself back to it.
Yeah. That's why meditation is such a great environment, because it creates helpful conditions for us to focus. Are we supposed to spend our entire life in meditation? No, we're not. But it's like a dress rehearsal. Many people use it as a holiday, as an escape. You know, like going on vacation and they come back, and now I've got to come back to my, you know, shitty job that I hate. And they go to meditate, and oh yes, lovely, oh lovely angels, lovely universe. And then they come back, and now I'm back in me, you know. And that I wouldn't begrudge anyone a holiday, but you know, you're meant to, if you go to visit the sunshine, bring it back with you, yeah. So integrate that. So meditation should be a dress rehearsal. It's not an escape. Nevertheless, in day-to-day circumstances, we can't hold our thoughts for very long, can we? And that means we can't sustain that impression for very long, positive or negative. But if this process does happen, whereby the theme stays the same, the thoughts might change within it, like replace one another and jump over like this, but the theme stays the same, then we keep within the same mindset, even though we've changed the thoughts, yes? And the reason that we run in themes is because of the frequency. The frequency you're in predisposes you to the kind of thoughts that you think. If you look at the grid, you can see that the first thoughts in survival are fearful thoughts. And of course, we're not just saying that there is such a thought, one thought as a fearful thought. There are a whole host of fearful thoughts, you know. An intruder might come into my house, I'm afraid of the dark, you know, dogs scare me, and on and on and on. So there are, that is listing like a whole category, and you can see it is consistent with the other qualities and conditions that you find in survival. And then the next one up is consumptive, which we said yesterday is this of always having to consume. Yeah? Your thoughts are always wanting to add something. There's always a sense of lack and wanting to add something else in. All of those qualities in security are within that same bandwidth. And you can see how they're all related. So as you go up through these 7 levels of the grid, you're occupying different frequencies, and that's why the type of mindset changes. So by the time you get to open, if you have an open mindset, then there are hundreds of thoughts which fit inside an open mindset, are there not? Yeah? Oh, I'm curious. Oh, that looks good. I wonder about that. Or even if you hear negative feedback, okay, I can take that in, yeah? It's very different to then if you were fearful. The exact same circumstances, such as negative feedback, hit you very, very differently if you're in a fearful mindset than if you're in an open mindset, don't they? You know? Sometimes people try to prepare us. Sit down, have a cup of tea, and take a deep breath, they say, before they tell us they've burnt our house down. A responsible mindset is a different one again. It's where you're not just saying okay to everything that comes towards you. You're actually saying, I'm going to take charge of my mind. I'm actually going to manage the content of my mind and be proactive in the kind of thoughts that I think and the actions that I take. Again, with benevolent. By the time you get up to collective intelligence, you're not really operating on a mindset there. We couldn't say that God is in a certain mindset. But collective intelligence and even benevolence are sort of beyond the point where you're worrying about choosing your thoughts. It's become automatic. It's become your automatic nature by that time. So let's have a little look at the kind of mechanism that happens then between thought. So here's a thought that you've had once. Give me an example of a contracted thought. I'm alone. In my case, that's a relief. Oh, dear. I'm terrible. I give my children such worries, when people talk about, oh, so-and-so died. Oh, no, that must be terrible. And I'll say, I'll go. I'll go in there instead. I'm always saying, oh, lucky things. Can't wait. I am alone. Okay. If we think that thought once, let's try and guess the kind of energetic imprint. Now remember that we're not dealing with Play-Doh or clay here, or even cookie dough. We're dealing with universal intelligence, and it's very, very, very sophisticated. So it doesn't do a crass version of I am alone. It isn't like a hammy actor. If the universe is going to do I am alone, it puts its back into it, does a bloody good job. So when you feel I am alone, if you believe it's true, you feel alone. You feel like it is true. It is enormously convincing. It has every trick, this is existence itself we're talking about here, has every trick in the book at its disposal. If you choose, and existence would say, even those thoughts that come in, if you accept them in, that's your choice. You have to take responsibility for the ones that come in. You can't say, I was abandoned as a child, therefore I have the right to feel that, therefore I'm not responsible for that thought. You could think that if you want, but without responsibility you'll never overcome it, you'll never change the experience. So I am alone, it comes in, what kind of impression does it create? What do you feel? What's the sensation of I am alone? Try it out in your own being now.
It leads to kind of depression.
Yeah.
I'm separate.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try and do the, I'll repeat. It leads to a kind of depression. And what was the other? Separate. Yeah. Separation. And now let's try to stick with the sensation rather than the label we give to the sensation. Fear. So, yeah, but again, fear, these are all labels that we give to the actual sensation. What is the sensation of being alone?
Emptiness.
Emptiness. What about that sense of, it's like a sort of panic and shock, yeah? You feel it around the heart, that sort of feeling. And you see how eloquent I am? The feeling. It's consistent with my spelling ability. Right up my alley. I'm actually very good at spelling. I don't know why I'm saying that about myself. Just none of the words I've attempted thus far.
Usually this sensation arises when somebody close to you dies. Very real.
It feels very real, yeah, so you feel cut off.
Cut off.
Yeah, which is also somewhat of a description, but we'll go with it.
Even loss.
Loss, yes, a feeling of loss, yeah, very good. Yeah. So, I was going to say, I don't want to take your struggles away from you, but actually I do. None of that has happened. None of that has happened. All that's happened is a thought has come in and created a sensation. That is what has happened. The actual occurrence of separation, loss, cut-off, shock, emptiness has not happened. Do you see that distinction? Yeah? You've given rise, you've created a temporary energetic impression. That's all you've done. You haven't created the reality of it. There's such an important distinction. You've created a temporary energetic impression, the appearance of this thing. You haven't created the actual thing.
The illusion's created the delusion.
The illusion has created the delusion. You haven't created loss. You are powerful beings, but you're not powerful enough to create the reality of loss. Why can you not create the reality of loss? It's not existentially possible to create absence from presence. This is why I make such a big deal about understanding the design, because the design shows you what is real, and our use of it, our misunderstanding of it, leads to apparent circumstances.
So what's the reality of loss then?
That it doesn't exist. The reality, the impression of loss is that you don't have. It's a feeling of loss. You haven't. There is no such thing as actual loss. There's only the feeling of loss. Now, I know that those of you, I can feel your minds clicking over saying, well, surely the impression is the reality, Jeddah. It's not. It's not. Because you're making the impression of loss with a substance that is expansive, light-filled, and harmonious, is eternal, ever-present, and is in a frequency which cannot be downgraded. So it retains those properties whilst it's doing the impression of loss. And the way you can check this out is if you were to shift, right now, the only reason that you've got loss is not because loss exists. If loss existed, then the person next to you would get it at the same time. It would be an existential reality, but it's not. It's only an impression which happens in you in that moment. If you take your attention off this and put it into something else, you're going to get something else. It's fleeting. You're creating the impression of something, but because you feel it, because it's taking place in your physical body, your emotions and your mind, and because you think that is you, your identity is based down there in your humanness. When your humanness engages in something, you say, I am at a loss. I am separate. You believe the impression that you've just created is a statement of fact about who you are.
Is it something about though how we're conditioned to learn these kind of words and we learn to put labels to certain feelings?
To some degree, but it doesn't completely explain the mechanism. The mechanism is stronger than the cultural bias. So
there's no such thing as grief?
yes! Sorry, I contain my excitement about that thought. There's no such thing as grief. There's no such thing as actual grief. There is such a thing as the impression of grief. My brother was 21 when he died, so I know what loss very close to you feels like. And I know the journey of grief has its, it has its wisdom and all of that. I'm not belittling any of these things. I'm not trying to take them away from the sort of human constellation of experience, all I'm trying to do is insert discernment, objectivity, and realization between the sense of self and what is happening in that moment. They are not synonymous. We overlap them. And it's down to where our identity lies. If our identity is in the full extent of our being, so we recognize, we fully feel, acknowledge, recognize, and accept that we are a full universal being, we have all of these levels and energy bodies right down into a beautiful physical form, then as I experience that death, that absence of somebody, I'm not just going to process it as what does this say about me, or what am I feeling. The I, for me then, is not just my physical body is no longer in the same space-time continuum as that physical body. My emotional body cannot relate to that emotional body. My mental body cannot relate to that one. My voice cannot converse with that voice. That is the sense. If I think of myself only in those terms and all of those elements in that person are removed, I would feel a sense of loss. But if I know that I'm more than that, and there's other elements to my being, which that being also has, they are not appearing on earth at this moment, but they still have all of those other categories. I know I am connected, maybe not on the seeing level or the feeling level, but I am connected to them still. Now, that wouldn't necessarily completely wipe out. It wouldn't be like, oh, brother's died. It wouldn't be like that. But it wouldn't be that kind of heart-wrenching shock that one feels when one thinks of they've been wiped out, snuffed out, never more, they don't exist. That is a massive shock. What happens is, especially when you live in close proximity with people and loved ones, is because we are massive, our energy fields are constantly interacting. So as you spend a lot of time, like Rod, is your wife still with us?
Sorry,
Is your wife still with us?
Yes.
Yes. How long have you been married?
52 years.
52 years. Lovely. So over those 52 years, there's a lot of weaving between those two energy fields. And then you, like building bridges between the two. So if one were to die, all of the places that we've connected physically, emotionally, and mentally, those patterns are still in our field. And the journey of grief, the reason why I have so much respect for the journey of grief, because I've seen it more than once in my own experience. In 2012, I lost my best friend and another dear friend. Is that the journey of grief is just gradually shedding the physical, emotional, and mental patterns in your field that you've laid down with that person. And you have to, if you only know yourself on those levels, you only want to relate on those levels, and you still want a physical connection, it's not there. You still want emotional connection, it's not there. Mental connection, it's not there. All the levels we're told, to embrace in a relationship. If they're not available, we're like, ugh. And so that can be very hard on us. But if you have fostered and maintained a heart connection and all the other levels of our being, where we're still connected, that person still exists, they're just not physically present, then we still feel their presence, we don't feel the massive loss. And yes, it does still take time to get used to and retrain our physical, emotional, and mental levels to revise the way we communicate with that person and how we feel their presence. It does. And that's the journey of grief. So I've seen the journey of grief, depending on how close you are with the person, it's about a year to 2 years. And obviously if it's somebody very, very close, like a spouse or a child, it's about 5 years it takes. And it can be quickened or lengthened depending on our willingness to recalibrate our field. But the worst experiences of loss is when we are clinging to a determination to connect with that person on those 3 levels, and they're no longer available. And that's often when anger arises within the grief process. Yes?
And I think it's often more painful when you haven't completed your business with that person.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's when people really grieve.
Yeah.
Whereas when you've had a 52-year relationship, then it looks like that person is not grieving like you think they should do. But they're not grieving because, as you say,
There's no unfinished business. Yeah.
still there, still in there.
Yeah.
They haven't gone anywhere.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very important point. Yeah, when we feel like we've got unfinished business. And of course, we can take care of unfinished business on unseen levels. Intention still works, energy still works, the person is still technically there, but they're not there on a physical level, so we have to use other forms of communication other than physical, emotional, and mental. I remember at my brother's funeral, I was born with inner sight, so I can see things that other people can't. And I remember at my brother's funeral, and his body was lying there in the coffin, you know, the whole congregation weeping. And I'm looking at my brother over here, standing in the corner like this. You know, he was very amused by the whole undertaking and not remotely. And he was everywhere, you know, like in those films, you know, like in Ghost, you know, that film. He was everywhere. And I could see him just as clearly as the body in the coffin, and his presence there. And of course, if you have that kind of facility or faculty, it's easy to be reassured. But I saw how the death process was fine for him. He was completely and utterly fine. He was more than fine. And it was all of us left who were in bits. It was very interesting. Mindsets. Okay, let's continue. If I have this thought once, it's going to make an impression in my field, and then because I can't hold my attention in that for very long, and I move on to, oh, did I do my tax return? Oh, is it time for lunch? Oh, I must pick up the children from school, and off we go. And then the impression gets replaced by something else. But if we have this and we generate these kind of sensations, the sensations are convincing. If this storyline of I am alone with attendant sensations, I mean, this doesn't feel like a dress rehearsal anymore. It feels like the actual performance now. Yeah. So if these are all firing, the mind is occupied by this, the sensations, feelings are occupied by this, and then we will start to label them. What do we call this? If these, because I was trying to get at the actual sensations. What do we say? What are the kind of things we say? I am depressed. I am what? Yeah. Well, heavy would probably be up here, but you can be there. We might say it. So we start to label it, yeah? So I said yesterday or the day before, we don't go up to people and say, hello, you know, I'm feeling a little, you know, rigid in my heart right now, and my legs are a little bit heavy, but there's a bit of lightness somewhere around the back of my left ear. We just try to sum it up and create like a label. We give people labels, and we trade in labels all the time. Hi, how are you? I'm fine. Oh, you know, we've just got these little sort of sound bites for trying to convey a category of feeling. So if I've got this firing in my mental being, I've got this firing in my feeling being, what is going on in my physical being? And that's maybe where, you know, the heaviness comes in. So we've got all parts of our so-called humanness engaged now in this, haven't we? Yeah? The full cast is on the stage. And maybe I had a childhood where my mother ignored me, or went back to work when I was a tiny baby and left me, or preferred my siblings to me, or and, yeah? Maybe those circumstances, so now sort of lay down the predisposition so that when I feel I am alone, the sensations kick off, the body is participating. We think that is happening to us. We think it's real, as we've already discussed. We think it's real, and we think it is happening to us. So we think the I, that's why we say, I am alone, I am sick, I am sad, I am hurt. Your I is none of those things. Your I is none of those things. Your I is the faculty of consciousness to notice whatever is happening in your being in that particular moment. It is never sick, sad, hurt, worried, fearful, ever. It is just simply noticing. Otherwise, you would have two mirrors on the wall and you'd say, I like looking in this mirror because this mirror is the beautiful mirror. If I look in this mirror, it's the ugly mirror. It's a mirror. You know, it doesn't have any agenda. All it does is reflect. Yeah? Your consciousness is just noticing where your attention is, what frequency you're in, what pattern you're creating, what thought you're holding, what belief you're holding. That's all. Your consciousness is just giving you feedback. But instead of noticing that consciousness is noticing what's going on here, the I is noticing what's happening in the being, because the I is arising in the being, we can't separate the I from the beingness, and so we say, I am whatever it is we're noticing. We don't make that distinction between the I and the experience. Yeah? And that, my friends, is responsible for every single human challenge, disorder, disaffection, alienation on the planet. That right there. That little seemingly innocuous mechanism scales up to become those widespread systemic problems that we saw last night. It all comes back to this. So that is the key to unlock everything that happens at that point. So if I think the thought once, I have the impression once, and then I go on to think something else, no harm done. But if I have the conditions somewhere, either, it doesn't have to be my childhood, it could be I had a very happy childhood, then I got into a marriage, and then my husband decided to, run off with the next door neighbor one day without telling me, and then the pattern started. Huh? So it doesn't all have to stem from childhood. So if the conditions are there, if the story is there, the story will keep feeding you reasons to think that again and again and again and again and again and again and again. What happens to your energy field when you think things again and again and again and again? What happens to the impressions in your energy field when you are asking it to keep making that same pattern?
Become denser. Depressed. Become denser.
Yeah. What happens is that your conscious mind, in its wisdom, says she has ordered the same dinner every night for the last 15 years. We're not going to wait for her order anymore. We're just going to give it to her. things that you order over and over and over and over again no longer pass through your conscious mind for review. Do you still want to feel alone? Do you still want to feel alone? Oh, bugger that. Let's just put it in the subconscious. We're pretty sure she wants it because she keeps ordering it. We'll put it in the subconscious. The subconscious takes hold of it. It doesn't need to pass through the conscious mind in order to activate experience. So, when you're conscious, when the I is present within your being, and you understand the full extent of your being, not just the small I, you understand the full extent of your being, you have the right to monitor your thoughts, affect the sensation, the outcome. As soon as you feel pain, you say, I don't like that, it doesn't feel good, I want to get away from it, you want to get out of the present moment. The I jumps away from the present moment into some, what does it jump into? Because it can't leave the present moment, so what does the I jump into?
Awareness.
I wish it did, but it doesn't. It jumps into future and past. Yeah. Future and past. It jumps into
A new thought.
Possibly a new thought. But when we're absenting ourselves, we have to imagine we're in the future or the past. We're not. We're thinking about those in the present. So that's the only way the I can do that. The I always wants to get out of the present when it feels contraction. Yes? Generated by a thought up here, backed up by a consistent story over here. So you leave the present moment, or you think you do. As soon as you leave the present moment, there's nobody on duty. It's like you sitting in row 1 on EasyJet, and then you notice that the pilot and the co-pilot come out of the cockpit and they go down to chat up the stewardesses. Who's driving the plane? When your consciousness vacates your being, the subconscious says, oh my God, send in the reserve crew. And your subconscious leaps into being and starts to order your sensations for you. But look what you've parked down there as a belief. Consistent thoughts become assumptions, consistent assumptions become beliefs. Consistent beliefs get stored in the subconscious. You have to be on duty if you want to have any say in what happens to you. You have to be consciously present. You have to know the full extent of your being, otherwise you're stuck in a small version of yourself that is easily affected and not very effective. If you know the full extent of your being and you're the I, and you might still have, like I do, I do not have a rosy, childhood story to tell at all. But if your I is embodied in the full extent of your being, taking into account your expansion, light and harmony as a ongoing truth, then even though you might have that childhood, you might have been beaten up, every day, you might even encounter the thought, I am alone, because the circumstances are happening in that moment. But when the sensation kicks off, as it must if you encounter that thought, you feel it, but you don't leave the scene. You don't leave the scene. You feel it and you know contracted sensation can only be present because of contracted thought. And what's the beauty about contracted thought?
They don't last.
Don't expand.
You can let it go.
It isn't real. It isn't real. If it's contracted, it's not real. Ah.
It's a golden opportunity.
It's a golden opportunity, yeah. Is that working? better? Bit better? Some of you are still blinded by the light. you are illumined. We'll all come like this. Oh! Glowing with light.
You use the expression I, but not self. So self is something completely different.
Exactly right. Well done. Yes, exactly right. I is the conscious presence. Yes? So what determines where you place your conscious presence? What moves it from one thought to another? How can I put my conscious attention here and then there? In my foot, from my hand to my foot. What is
Will and desire.
will and desire? I love this man. Will. So, not willfulness, not even, funnily enough, willingness, although willingness is the offspring of will. Will is something, it is existence's best kept secret. I'm letting you in on this. Don't tell everybody, but I'm telling you guys. What they say, where there's a will, there's a way, but they don't really know what they're dealing with when they say that. Will is the absolute, it is like it's like being given the power of God. It is so incredible. If you engage your will, you can do anything. If you don't believe me, try it. It is absolutely amazing. And I'm not talking about determination or a fixed mindset or motivation or even intent. It's a kind of intent, but it's divine intent. And it is completely unassailed by all the little gremlins which can beset us at every other point in our journey. If you
Bigger than self-confidence.
Absolutely bigger than self-confidence. Much, much bigger. It's like having more than a Harry Potter magic wand. It is, if you engage the will and you choose to place consciousness in something, nothing gets in your way.
So maybe that doesn't happen that often with many people?
No, it hardly happens ever with anybody. Why doesn't it happen? Because we don't know about this stuff. Did anyone learn about this stuff when they're at school? I didn't. I had to learn it all the hard way. Hours and hours and hours of investigation it took me. I wish someone had told me. I might not have listened to them. I was very wayward. So what I want to say is about the thought becomes a mindset, and that produces lots of thoughts, which produces lots of sensations, produces I've got the evidence now. I felt that once, I felt that twice, I felt that 50,000 times, that alone feeling. It must be true. Then it becomes an assumption that it's true. Assumption that something is true and truth are not the same things. We as human beings, I notice this all the time within families, we think, just because I think it, it's true, it's right. When we have discussions about, I try to initiate discussions with my children about how we should organise the planet and run things. And, we don't all have the same opinion about that. But often we think things are right and we think they're true just because we think them. And we give a power to our thought. And if our thoughts are everyday thoughts based on what I want, then they're very unlikely to be representative of the truth. However eloquent we are, however forceful we are. But if our thoughts are more like divine thoughts, divine thoughts, they don't impose their will. All of this is optional. Everything I'm telling you, if God had imposed this on you, you'd know about it. You have a choice. You have a choice, and this is where, we were, Jose and I were discussing this last night, about the way that choice and that privilege of humanity and consciousness has been sold to us throughout the ages. Sometimes it's been sold to us as a kind of a divine right. And we've taken that divine right to bully and plunder and domineer. But actually we do have a divine right, but we have a divine right to choose truth, which you could say, well, that's not much of a choice. Ultimately, no, but you know, you can choose temporarily opposite circumstances. That's the extent of your choice. You can choose the truth and the expansion and how things are in line with that, or you can choose this stuff and all of its friends and neighbours, which we've tried to represent somehow on the grid. And now I'm not getting religious on you here. I'm not saying, you know, come to God or, you know, be damned. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, if we choose to think opposite thoughts, we are going to have opposite sensations. That's just going to happen. That's just the law of physics. That's just the way it's designed to happen. And we have a right to do that. We do. We have a right to explore what that is. We just feel rubbish while we're doing it. So the feedback it gives us in form of sensation is gently saying, you can have this thought. There's no limit on the kind of thoughts we can think. If you want to feel alone, go ahead. And this is it's not a punishment that you get that sensation. It's just, that's the energetic impression. You're asking a substance which is expansive, light-filled, harmonious, and perpetual, malleable, responsive, and intelligent to do an impression of absence. And it's like, you know, I'll try my hardest, but I can't become absence because I am presence. Does that make sense? It will try its hardest to create what you ask for, but it can't completely fulfill your request if you keep choosing that which it is not. I didn't make existence. I'm just telling you what I've learned about how it is designed, what its nature is, and how it functions. That's my job. So I'm not saying you have to do anything. Please don't read that into my words. I'm just saying, if you choose this, this will happen. If you choose that, that will happen. And you don't need me to tell you that because you all have your own human experience. You know what fear feels like. You know what loss feels like. You know what greed feels like. You know what jealousy feels like. The tragedy is you don't feel like you have a choice in whether you feel those things or not. You don't know how, when you're in the midst of it, how to change that.
What age does the child have the ability to choose?
The I, independently arising consciousness, starts to arise in the child at the age of 3. So that's why the child starts to say I am at the age of 3. Before that, we are now producing children that can say I a bit earlier because they're kind of prematurely awake, or some of them are coming in very awake. But normally the I arises around 3. But the child goes through a process of 21 years of developing the I. By which time Fintorn opens the doors and says, let me help you get rid of that. And you spend the next 21 years trying to dissolve it again. So why do we not get an I till the age of 3?
We're still in heaven. Because we wouldn't contract and we wouldn't do the contraction.
Well, we do actually. Babies cry. You're not going to like the answer, but I'll tell you anyway. We need to absorb what the previous generation have, their unfinished business. We need to absorb, sorry. Didn't say it would all be nice. We need to absorb the unfinished business from the previous generation. We need to pass on the collective work.
Don't take it personally.
Don't take it personally. Exactly. to have the opportunity to transmute it. Yes.
Can you develop that a little more?
Yes, but
I just wanted to make sure I understood. It seems to me that the only choice is either presence or absence. And if you choose absence because of pain,
yes.
then the subconscious comes and takes things over, and clouds get in front of the sun.
Yeah.
If you choose presence, then you choose pain, basically, because you're choosing to be present with the pain. But through that, you can then do something with the pain, the discomfort, the rigidity, the limitation, and the restriction,
Yes.
to make it. What happens then? What do you do with all
Yes.
that stuff?
Okay, I love your summation. So we were laughing this morning about cake or death, but that's like death or death. Instant death, prolonged death. You said when you choose to be present, you're being present to pain. Yes and no, because if you choose to be present, you've chosen to be present within an organism which has furnished you with all of the qualities and nature and structure and abilities to make a very different perception of the pain, therefore experience of the pain, therefore recalibrate. Yes. So initially, when you start to become present and all of your patterns are still firing and triggering and all the contractions are still kicking off in your field, you will feel, maybe you will feel your pain more acutely, but you also have the same opportunity to be aware of other aspects of your being which can come into play. If we choose to point our perception from a uniquely humanistic point of view, we will always see separation and loss. If we factor in the whole extent of our being, we raise the frequency. Consciousness is like an amazing fishing rod. So if I want to, say I'm feeling my pain of loss now, and then I remember that I'm more than that, can use my consciousness to throw a line into my higher self, and every time I use consciousness to place it somewhere, it instantly connects me to that. The sensation of that floods into me and then starts to move my particles around. The higher the vibration you log on to, the more it can override slower vibrations. So that's just a law of physics, that the faster the vibration, it overrides slower vibration. So if I'm in this vibration of loss and I just try to go to the vibration of comfort, it's a slight improvement, but the effects aren't mitigated that much. If I go into connection, yeah, that feels a bit better. But if I go into the 7th or the 6th, then I feel a sense of expansion and light and harmony. It's very hard to hold expansion, light and harmony and still insist that there is this loss, because the loss just gets picked up and lifted out. So what we're dealing with here, we are all physicists. We have to be competent, conscious physicists. I still think there's something I haven't said that I wanted to say. Yes?
Also, I think there are chemicals released into the body.
Absolutely right.
Which has been measured now.
Absolutely right.
Depending on the thoughts.
Yes, absolutely right. So Rod was saying that depending on the thought, there are different chemicals released into the body. Depending on the thought, you will occupy different neural receptor sites in your brain. So those of us who insist on this thought and on this belief, we have got a whole raft of neural receptor sites which are set up to take that thought, it's already plugged in, and that is the mechanism of our subconscious right there. And we can see in the brain that dominant thoughts, repeated thoughts, create grooves in our brain structure. They're called like superhighway, neural superhighways. And so when we try to think a new thought, say we've come to a workshop like this and, you know, Jeddah says, I might want to try on that thought. Well, remember this. If you want to try to do anything, remember this, because it makes it much easier, like 60 to 90% easier with engaged will. But say we want to think a new thought, because our brain is set up to facilitate the old thought, there are no neural sites and neural pathways for the new thought. So you try to think the new thought and it feels weak, it feels like it won't work. You have to persevere with that in order to create and lay down that neural pathway and create the receptor site. You have to engage in that activity. We're all sitting around, we're so passive in like wanting everything to be done for us, wanting everything to be easy. The whole purpose of choice, responsibility, and contribution is that we have to do this for ourselves, but if we remember who we are, we know we're set up to succeed. Yeah? If we believe we're this, we think we're set up to fail. That's why everyone says, oh, life's so hard. Why me? It's so difficult. Yeah? That is the perception when we operate there. So we have to overcome that through our own efforts. And this choice thing, coming back to this choice thing, because where you place consciousness will create impressions, where you allow consciousness to go will create conscious pathways of light. Consciousness is a light. You shine the light you see, you take the light away you don't see. It's that simple. You're creating more and more light. So basically it's like the eye is reaching out into the full extent of itself and shining the light. And then you see this, therefore you can know it, therefore you can feel it, and therefore you can revise your estimation of who you are. So in terms of what are the choices, consciousness evolves through the choices it makes. That's what we try to represent with the grid, you know, the challenge or responsibility. We haven't got there yet. But these represent the dominant choices that are made at different frequencies, different stages of consciousness. As consciousness expands through here and through here, we see more, we understand more, we experience more, and it affects our choices. Yeah? It affects who we believe ourselves to be, our sense of identity. So we can't undertake evolution without challenges. Like I said the other day, you know, we're not here for just, you know, a cavalcade like the presidents have, where, you know, the security men have already got rid of everyone on the route and, you know, you just get waved through like some very important diplomat and all the lights flashing, you know. Life isn't like that. We're here to encounter apparent challenges. There are no real challenges, but apparent challenges, convincing challenges, in order to cause us to stop and make a different choice. Those challenges come to us to show us what resides in our thinking, what resides in our subconscious, individually and collectively. Don't take it personally. We're not all assigned to the same area, are we? Those guys on the film last night, they've chosen to focus on economics. Some of you have chosen to focus on health. Some of you have chosen to focus on the environment. Some of us have tried to do it all. But some of us have chosen to focus on science, you know. We choose our arena. And we also are clustered in other categories that some of us have chosen to work on fear. Some of us have chosen to work on doubt. Some of us have chosen to work on relationships. Some of us have chosen to work on finances. How is it that sometimes, you know, if you're working on finances and you're really struggling with finances and just your friends, they just seem to keep getting checks in the post or job offers, or, you know, it all just seems to flow. And then why is it that I am, you know, because you're working on finances. You're working on your individual relationship to finances, but you're also working on the collective arena of finances, all the dominant thoughts which are in that arena, you know? You think the people who are struggling with finances have all created a unique situation? No. There's probably 5 thoughts amongst the billions of them that are doing it. So you're taking in that thought about finances, you're feeling what it feels like to be, you know, oh, you know, the next bill is coming, how will I meet my rent? And to overcome that and offer us a different response, yeah? We're all like little ants in the ant's nest. We've all got a job, and we all just need to do it with willingness and a sense of responsibility. And get on with it. There's people who are being born and growing up now who want to know what your different response to finances is. Or maybe you're over here, you're working on relationships. Maybe you have a fantastic job, you have lots of money, yeah, you have great friends, you have spectacular holidays, but you just cannot find the right partner. And all of the thoughts, there's probably 5 thoughts that go for that group too, all of the thoughts that go with that. Because it's a story, and there's the dominant thoughts and the dominant mindset, and then there's the dominant feelings. There's not much difference there. And the collective unconscious is saying, well, what can you offer me? Yeah? And that is the journey of evolution. The grid is not just an individual journey for you guys. This is the evolution that organizations, societies, and planets undertake. This is the journey of conscious evolution that we all go on. And we are all doing a job within it. We're not doing it all simultaneously. Yeah? So, yes, there's choice. And we cannot evolve unless we're faced with a challenge. Challenge is all challenges is to present you with an illusion that you can dispel. You have the opportunity to dispel. That's it, right there. That's the job. Finished on time. Result. Yay. Oh no, a question. The question department is closed. Please fall back at. Sorry?
I just had a comment.
Oh yes, lovely.
Well, you answered my question with that last bill, so I appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just my interpretation that I guess we would have different life paths, and there's different, maybe, family history or subconscious material. So no one's life will look the same as you stated. So we would have these unique challenges that we may not be aware of, but obviously this is what we signed up for.
Yes.
So no one's life will look the same.
Yes, exactly right. Thank you for that. Yeah, our life path looks and feels unique because it is. We've got our unique stage of conscious evolution. We've got our unique role. We've got our soul contract. So our soul has chosen to deal with certain things in certain lives. Yeah? We've got our job, employment with collective consciousness, which we can't get out of. You think you go and sit in a cave, you want to hide from it all, you go and sit in a cave, make it cozy, whatever, for the rest of your life, and you want to avoid this stuff.
I think as well that the background, what you know, what words.
Yes.
Words,
Yes.
because you can express better your feelings when you have different words to. But words are fashionable as well. That's a problem for our society.
Yeah, I agree.
Aggro is opportunity to evolve.
Say again?
Aggro is opportunity to evolve.
Oh yeah, let's get a t-shirt. Aggro is opportunity to evolve. Aggro is a uniquely British expression, I think. Where does it come from?
Aggravation.
Aggravation, of course.
Can you just give me one sentence?
Oh yes, I'll come back to you.
Up to 3 years, before 3 years old, which life is affecting that? Is it that person, that 3-year-old's previous life, or?
It's.
You said the previous generation.
Yeah, the previous generation has to pass on its unfinished business, but your unfinished business as a soul, incarnation into incarnation, that's an ongoing contract. Yeah, but you don't develop a conscious I, independently conscious I, because in those first 3 years you are absorbing all of the dominant mindsets and memes and social norms from your environment without the conscious I getting in the way, taking it personally.
So no wonder there's the terrible twos.
It's a bloody hell! Yeah. No, I don't want to take on your societal norms. And give me some custard while you're at it. Yes. It's a handing over process. Yeah. Okay. Let's go for lunch and meet back here at 2. Jolly good.